this morning, actually. Let me just read this. Jane doesn't know I'm doing this. So, Jane Schoenbrun is hands down the most original voice in film in the last decade, but also confounding. Do We're All Going to the World's Fair and I Saw the TV Glow have a genuine niche in the commercial indie horror market, or are they unicorns? Either way, they are a wonder to behold. That is actually a former guest of this festival, Mr. Paul Schrader, wrote that. Just today. A bunch of us saw this film at the world premiere at Sundance earlier this year, and we're just so struck by it. It's almost uncategorizable. I think that's the word. And so we just had to have it. It was the first thing we asked for, basically, at Sundance. Let's just bring Jane up. Jane, let's say a few words about the movie. Jane Schoenbrun, everybody.
Thank you. I don't get that every day, though I want it. Wow, this is my first time here at the Music Box Theater. It's so unbelievably beautiful. We have a lot of movie theaters in New York, but we don't have a movie theater like this one. And I can't believe it. You guys just get to come here and watch movies whenever you want. What? It's so beautiful. I love Chicago. I'm really honored and excited to be here and to be sharing the film with you guys at the Chicago Critics Film Festival. I loved the TV. Anyone watch the TV show The Critic back in the day? Grew up on The Critic, and I feel like The Critic really made, like, it was this very brief window in culture when I was like 8 years old, when like they were kind of trying to make being a critic like sexy. Like my favorite episode was when Siskel and Ebert broke up, and like Jay is trying to be both of their new partners. And they just are like Ebert's just calling Jay Sherman Gene. He's like, my name is Jay, and he's like, yes, Gene, I know. Some critic lore for y'all in the land of critics. I played in a pandemic online poker Zoom with Paul Schrader that my friend started, and then someone was like, you know who loves poker? Paul Schrader, and he just appeared. And he would just like, I have no idea if he remembers me from it. I kind of imagine he doesn't. He would regale the poker room with stories about. He had one story about. It's just like all this most 70s things you could imagine. There was one where he like drove a car off a cliff in Las Vegas with Jerry Bruckheimer. This was my pandemic. I emerged trans. I was. You guys have a lot of gay people here in Chicago. Is anyone here straight? Woo! Nice. We were walking in a neighborhood, and some people have been saying like, oh my God, the queer scene in Chicago is amazing. We walked by this gay bar, and they had something this afternoon called Madonna-rama. They were just, what? Yeah. Yeah. It was like, you could hear Madonna being sung by like 100 gay men from like 3 blocks away. And we were like, oh, that's like the pre-party. And then everyone's gonna descend on the Music Box Theater for Sunday nights I Saw the TV Glow. All right, I'm done almost. Play me out, the organ. Not yet. I'm so honored to share the film with you. Yeah, I like cracking some goofs and jokes and stuff up top because, it's like a really personal movie. It came out of like probably the most intense sort of emotional experience I've ever gone through, which is like the very early stages of transition and that moment when not only does everything feel like it's in flux in terms of like what your future is going to be, but you're really like reassessing everything you sort of have understood about home and family, all of these things that felt like the stabilizing forces in your life, but maybe were also holding you from something. And this movie was just like a really, I think, pretty earnest attempt to like wrestle with all of that and using cinematic language. And I can't believe I got to make it, and can't believe I get to be in this giant room sharing it with all of you. So, thank you.
And please stick around afterwards. We'll be doing a Q&A afterwards. Enjoy I Saw the TV Glow, everyone. All right. You guys are still here, so you must be. Please welcome Jane Schoenbrun back to the stage.
Can't tell if it's just I get three options. It's that you guys are all gay. It's that Chicago is really friendly, or this is what we in the business refer to as the Schrader bump.
D, all of the above. You mentioned earlier that this was conceived and I assume written at a time when there was a lot of upheaval in your life. Can you be a little more specific about some of the things that fed into this, and how far back did the sort of germs of this go? Did it go back before World's Fair, or was it right after? What were some of the things happening?
When I was 3 years old. No, I do think my process, and it's like worked a few times now, so that's just my process at this point. It's strange. It's not like there's always like one thing that kind of gets lodged and it's not a movie yet, and then it's sort of like, how do I grow this seed and explore it in a million different directions? And then it sort of becomes this like assemblage of different ideas or images that all feel like loosely interconnected, and then like really like the last step becomes, let me like figure out, or I'll do it like 18 times actually. I'll like outline a version of the movie that's like there's no narrative or like character resemblance to what eventually ends up being made, and then I'll just do that over and over again until it feels like I've sort of like figured out like the Occam's razor version of like the simplest and richest way to talk about like and fit in all of those things that occupied this world. For this one, I think really early was the idea of wanting to explore like this idea of like a TV show that gets canceled in youth or adolescence and ends in this unresolved way, and like that kind of haunting these people as they grow up, almost to the point where like they're feeling the pain or they're not able to move on with their lives because this TV show never got the resolution that they felt like they needed. And yeah, I mean, that was long before the sort of specific circumstances, but I do think it was I've always been, for like many, many years before I figured out I was trans, like really, I think like obsessed with just like the relationship between fiction and reality. To me feels like the core thing that like the work is always going to be about in some way. Like I've always been fascinated by that, like, and not just like this, the weird ways that like fiction can inform reality and reality can then like inform fiction, and this like very fluid process of like becoming, and I do think there are like obviously I was trying to work out something about my gender, I think, through these themes before I even understood that. But I had written World's Fair, my first film, it took like 5 years to write, and it was the same sort of thing where it like very quickly became what it was at the end of like a really long process of like being obsessed with wanting to talk about like these online spaces that I had rediscovered in my mid-20s, and that film I think was this like attempt to articulate dysphoria. I didn't have that word yet, and I didn't understand. It was like, how do I talk about like what was comforting about like dark online spaces for me as a teenager, and like something about those spaces standing in for like some wrongness or some feeling of unreality that was like very frustrating, and that I think at the time I was feeling again. I finally wrote the final draft of World's Fair in April 2019, which was the same month that I finally figured out I was trans. And I do think like what I was looking for, did somebody just woo figuring out I was
It's appropriate.
I wish you were there on the day.
Could he use the woo?
Yeah. I think that like the process of this was a film about like somebody trying to like articulate themselves through fiction, and sort of like a struggling, frustrated artist looking for like a way to express something that they didn't have language for, Casey and World's Fair, and that was very much me while I was working on the film. And I thought this was like a really beautiful organic process, and like when the film premiered at Sundance, I had been out publicly for maybe like 5 months, and it was all during the pandemic, and that was like the first time I was in public as a trans person.
Oh, wow.
Terrifying. And like, I was so scared because like I hadn't made the movie being like, I'm making a trans movie. I kind of, by the time I got there, I knew, but I was really just trying to honor like the internal feeling of it all. And so I was terrified that people were going to be like, this is bad representation. You are a bad trans. But the opposite happened, and like especially trans audiences were like, wow, this is like expressing the emotional realities of a thing I've experienced, which is a thing that I don't think we like have a lot of films about yet. And so I think I felt emboldened by that. Although I guess I wrote TV Glow before World's Fair had even got into Sundance. And it was really like 2 months after I got on hormones and changed my name. And like I had come out like a year earlier to friends and family, but most friends and family are just kind of like, cool. I don't know what non-binary is, but it sounds like you're going through something, so like good luck.
There's a lot of things you brought up that I want to follow up on. Starting with the fact, what was your pink opaque? What was your show that you obsessed over like this? Assuming there was.
I mean, besides The Critic, which we've already talked about.
Established that, yeah.
Like a succession of them, but I think like Buffy obviously is the big one. But like I'd say the movie is like 70% about like my like unhealthy obsession with Buffy the Vampire Slayer during my teenage years, and 30% about like how much I adored Saturday Night Nickelodeon as a kid, like Snick, and just the way that like, the way that I would look forward all week to like this programming block where it was like, okay, well I can like leave the drudgery of life behind on Saturday nights and like fully give myself to like not just like one show that I love, but this whole sort of like experience, this curated experience.
Did you have a curator? Did you have a Maddie? Did you have someone that you watched these with?
Yeah. No, well, I did have a Maddie. The Maddie is loosely inspired by somebody, this like girl who is a year older than me in high school, and who like on the first day of 9th grade like saw me and my friends who were like the vaguely alt little losers, and came over and like showed us her like nipple piercings. And we were like, cool.
You mentioned Buffy, and that's certainly something that a lot of people who've written about this film have mentioned, that the show resembles that. But I'm wondering, that moment where Owen sees the show again as a much older person and realizes it's kind of crappy and the effects are terrible. Did you have that? Have you had that moment with Buffy, or I don't know?
I rewatched all of Buffy, and actually, I think most of Angel. I think we skipped some of Angel. But I've repped some Angel for sure. Don't get me wrong. But we rewatched all of it during the pandemic, and I think it mostly holds up. I love Buffy. There's a lot of cheese in there. I think like that moment in the film is an interesting one for me because I don't think it's just this experience that I've certainly had of like watching a thing from childhood and being like, wait, that was actually like lame as fuck. It's like he uses the word embarrassed. He says like he was so embarrassed and he's just sort of stepped into this role of like literally being his father. He's like taken his father's place on this couch, and so for me that moment is very much about like whatever shame was inherent in his dad saying like, isn't that a show for girls, is like fully metastasized into this like it's sort of the height of whatever dysphoria is coming before his eventual seeing himself.
You bring up the father, the images, the portrayals of his masculine, they're not really role models, but just the masculine figures in Owen's life. His dad.
Yes, his role models.
I mean, whether he chooses to model himself after them or not, yeah, but they're just the ones that he's surrounded with, yes. And but his father, who's very cold and sort of passively cruel, and then there's this boss at the movie theater who's just an asshole. Like, I mean, is there a message in that about these are the male figures in his life, and he's kind of being torn apart, it seems like very desperately not to become like that. Is that something is that what it is? Is that a fair statement?
I think like a large part of, especially when I was writing this film and like initially conceiving of this film, and and again, this was 2 months after I had like really started a physical transition and was facing like all of the immediate backlash of it. I think there's like, it's a film about how something seemingly as innocuous as like your dad saying, isn't that a show for girls, can steal literal decades of your life. And if there's like a monster in the movie, right, like the villain just stares at us from the sky, like all that. I got an early note from like people on the script before we made the movie was like, oh, let's like really like get into the psychology of the dad though. And I was like, no, the dad psychology doesn't matter. It's like literally if the movie is about anything, it's just about like the power of that glare in its simplicity, but also in the way that like when you grow up sort of feeling gazed at like you're disgusting, or like you have some ephemeral sickness that even you don't understand, how can that not sort of create this the circumstances for shame and the predilection to like apologize for being yourself?
How deep into the mythology of the Pink Opaque did you get? Did you map out seasons? Did you I mean, how?
I do
I know
that
you
for
do that
fun.
sort of stuff.
Yeah. How? No, I'm a big nerd with that kind of thing. I don't think I mapped out like the actual like season arcs of the Pink Opaque because I actually realized that I don't know, they never meet up in person. That's kind of a hard. But definitely some, and it was a lot of fun anytime I got to like tinker in that world, and the art department kept being like, we need more episode names, and I would be like, gladly.
Yeah, we see a lot of names flash up on the
Yeah, there's some good ones. I want to watch Time Warp Talent Show. I think there's one called 1000th Period, which but there is one like sort of Easter egg that I think you'll need like a DVD remote to get, which is when Owen is at that downed power line in the episode guide pages are flying around. He picks one up and he goes like, season 6, episode 1, Escape from the Midnight Realm, and the intention of the movie is that like it's this weird Mobius strip where like you're literally watching that episode in a sense. And if you pause it and read the like description on the page in the episode guide, I like painstakingly made sure that every word was actually visible in frame. It'll sort of like clarify some of the like, it'll give you like some mythology about like what you're watching and why. It's like he's like reading an episode description. It's very Lovecraft-esque. It's like he's like reading, it's like In the Mouth of Madness shit. He's like reading an episode description like kind of about himself.
I've seen the film twice, and the second time opened up so much for me, so which means you all have to see it again. But the I somehow missed it when I saw it at Sundance that Emma Stone was a producer on this. How did you hook up with her, and what doors did she kind of open up?
Well, we were in Venice. I remember like the first time I talked to Em on a Zoom, I was in Dallas for the Oak Cliff Film Festival and had like just like a Zoom in my hotel. I was there with World's Fair, and then I remember like walking outside and it was like literally like billboards for like Cruella everywhere and like taxi cabs for Cruella. And I was just like, what the fuck? I was like, she was on a screen, we were just with me. It was very weird. Yeah, that level, I think there's like something about that level of celebrity that I see some commonalities with transness within, which is like, you kind of can't walk down the street without people being weird. And there's like complicated stuff with like changing your name, kind of. So, no, but I think I kind of played my cards well, to tell you the truth. Like, World's Fair premiered at Sundance and you know, was this like sort of plucky, like critics' favorite, and you know, but made for no money. And I had written the script for TV Glow, and I think I knew, and I had worked in the film industry for a long time, and I was like, I want to make this with A24, you know, like this. But it was jumping so many rungs in terms of budget, and I was like, we're gonna need adults in the room, and my reps helped me make a list of various adults, and it was. A lot of like ex-presidential presidents on the list. I don't know. Congressmen. We decided on M. No, I took a lot of meetings, and yeah, Hollywood is weird, and I don't really trust many people in Hollywood, and especially on calls like that where they're trying to like woo you. And I think what I found really comforting about Em, and who had just started this company Fruit Tree with her husband Dave, and they had like a small team of people working there, was that like they very much were just like artists, you know, like Dave had made this movie called Brixby Bear, and yeah, great film. And Em just takes her work so seriously, and they were just kind of like, we started this company because we, like, Em was like, I have a lot of power and I want to like use that power to get cool shit made, and I was like, cool, I'll take some of that power.
Here's my cool shit.
Yeah. And that's kind of, yeah, that was as simple as that.
So simple, yeah. No, again, the second time seeing it, the soundtrack just jumps out. I mean, the first time jumps out at you, too. But but I know I read in doing research for this, I read that how much putting this soundtrack together meant to you, and that you wanted to like pull from these very specific places for these songs. Can you just talk about, and you said you wanted to make the greatest soundtrack ever made, and it's,
I think I said since Garden State.
Okay. That's fair. But talk about where you found these artists and these songs.
And I did say that to A24, like the first time I talked to them. I was like, best since Garden State, guys, let's do it. We're taking it all away. I think a lot, I just wanted to give myself that gift, and it felt like the movie could hold it like a great 90s soundtrack, you know, like or like a soundtrack that was sort of the like, the equivalent of what like the Donnie Darko, or like the, you know, those Gregor Rocky movies, or like those John Hughes movies, just like this genre of movie, whatever you want to call it, like the teen angst weird thing, movie, like typically has like great teen angst music in it, and I think especially as like a child of the video store and of like Coconuts records or whatever, like yeah, shouts to Coconuts and figuring out your trans. Like I just like I have a lot of fondness for the way I think that like great needle drops in a movie can introduce you. Like I feel like I've discovered so many of my favorite musicians through that, especially in my younger years, and I also think, you know, like talking about the soundtrack now, there is something, because we've so moved away from like the original soundtrack in popular culture, and it does feel like this artifact of this like MTV late CD era. I think there is like something about like I don't think it's something that every filmmaker should do, because not every filmmaker is necessarily like a nerd like I am, but like I love music so deeply, and music was like that. Yeah, that girl who showed me her like nipple piercings, like my pink opaque was like her introducing me to like Belle and Sebastian, and you know, like being 14 and just like, yeah, like I clung to music so deeply, and I think there's something really nice about like, yeah, we commissioned 16 original songs, and the conceit, I basically told A24 I wanted to make a soundtrack that kind of doubled as the soundtrack to the Pink Opaque, you know, and the precedent being that like all of those shows from the 90s, it was like new bands were in town every week playing on Buffy or Party of Five or whatever. And I really wanted to yeah, like work with younger artists whose work I admired, and like kind of the prompt that we gave everyone was like, write the song that you would write if you played on Buffy at the Bronze. And I, you know, like gave everyone a lot of space, but also like some artists, I read the script and I was making them all like playlists and talking to them about, yeah, I got really geeky with it, and I was like, Jay Sum, I want you to write like the hit Teenage Fan Club single that never existed, and like, you know, like really just like it was so fun. Like that's just like me giving myself a gift. My producers were annoyed at me and were often like, we're making a movie, not a soundtrack. And I was like, no, we're making both.
And we were playing it in the lounge earlier, like before the movie.
It drops on streaming on, I guess, Friday, May 10th.
Speaking of nerdy, there's a moment in the movie where Maddie asks Owen, do you like boys or girls? And he says, I think I like TV shows. And I'm sure there are some people in here, I know I could have at one point in my life answered that like, well, I like movies. Like that's or I like music. Is that a close representation of what you were like at that age, or younger maybe?
Yeah, I think like, when I did mushrooms and started to figure out I was trans, how most of my Q&A answers begin. I really remember like sort of like grasping this idea that like I had felt like so much real love, like having experienced like love for other human beings. Like I have experienced that as well, and it's quite nice. But like especially in my younger years, like I think the primary place where so much of my love was going was like to media, you know, and especially Buffy, I think was like such a big one for me, and like, and it's weird, and I think it's a coping mechanism, right? Like I still, you know, like I think I'm much less dissociative these days, and I still love art and, you know, music and beautiful films, but it was a different thing where it was like all of my love, you know, like any form of like emotional relationship was going into like things that couldn't see me. You know, it was like a two-way mirror where like I could see them, but they couldn't see me. And you know, I could like invest in Buffy's high school experience, so I didn't have to invest in my own. And that kind of love and devotion, like I do think it, like I mean love quite literally, you know, like I've been in love, and I think I was like in love with those shows and with Buffy, and yeah, I think the movie is like, and World's Fair touches on it as well, just like the ways in which yeah, before it's safe to, like, because I do think to love, you need to be loving as yourself, right? Like, to love another person, it's not just like voyeurism. It's like you need to be sharing your true self with that other person to some degree. And I couldn't do that in my life, and so I did that with TV shows, and then I posted about them on internet forums.
Speaking of love, a significant portion of the crowd seems to love Fred Durst. Because when his name showed up in the credits, I read somewhere that you said he was kind of your, was the expression white whale? That was what you called him? Yeah. For this film, why was that? And
well, I started calling it that because I kept being like, all right, guys, when are we gonna talk about Cass and Frank? It's got to be Fred. It's got to be Fred. And they kept being like, we'll talk about that later. It was like the last person cast, and I was like, the whole time I was like, it must be Fred. And I think they like put me off as long as they could. I just thought it would be hilarious. And like piercing and penetrating, and like you know, this idea that like when you see the dad glaring from across the room, and that glare being something that like has to be visceral in the film in a very specific way, that like you could cast like any number of angry dads, but if you cast Fred Durst, like there's going to be an association of like what you feel when you see Fred Durst glaring. The only other candidate that I took seriously that I really had in my brain if Fred said no was Jimmy Fallon.
basically the same guy. The last thing I want to ask you before we wrap up is, have you ever been approached to direct something that maybe you didn't generate from the ground up? I mean, would you ever even consider that? Would you ever just let someone hand you a script, or would you need to be like as deeply connected to the material as you are for these last two films?
I mean, I definitely get like a lot of, after World's Fair, I got a lot of like internet cautionary tale scripts that they're sending me, and I got a lot of like cis person wrote a movie about trans people scripts, you know? Oh yeah. But then I got, in between World's Fair and this film, landed in my inbox, the Leprechaun remake. And my theory is that they were like, here's the meeting, they were like, whew. We've got gold. We've got the fucking Leprechaun. He's been to space, he's been to the hood, he's been back to the hood. But these woke motherfuckers in 2022, they don't want a movie about the Leprechaun anymore. They say that's ableist. So who can we get that's flawed, that no one could critique us? And then they spin the wheel in the office, you know? And the wheel has trans on it and a lot of other minorities, and like perfect. And I've been having a lot of fun on the press tour. Like, I think everyone's really scared of like getting, I don't know, like, I should probably be scared too of like agents being mad at you or something. But I've been doing a lot of like teasing, like Marvel and Mattel. Like Mattel asked for a meeting at Sundance, and I told them no. And then I've kind of been like negging them in the press ever since. I'm kind of like, I got my fucking dignity, Mattel. But I do think that like, I would do one of these things if I got Final Cut. And I'm really interested, like the People's Joker playing next door. I do think I'm like interested, yeah, shouts to Vera. Like I'm interested in like, destroying IP, you know? Like, Like to me, the high watermark is like Paul Verhoeven dressing Neil Patrick Harris up in Nazi regalia and like and no one notices what he's doing while he makes Starship Troopers. Like I think that like if an artist is capable of like doing actual like cultural violence to IP, that could be interesting. But I know enough about those places to know that like I don't think that's likely, and so I tread very lightly.
Jane, thank you so much for coming to Chicago and letting us play this movie. Jane Schoenbrun, everybody.